The early morning sky over Fort Hamilton was still tinged with pale orange, the faint light casting long shadows across the neatly lined barracks. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Donovan gripped the steering wheel of her silver SUV, her eyes scanning the horizon with a quiet intensity. The base sprawled ahead like a miniature city, gates stretching wide with armed guards posted at intervals. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life, a chapter she had earned through 2 decades of sweat, grit, and unyielding determination. Yet, for all her experience, this morning held a small, unexpected twist. As she approached the main gate, the young guard stationed at the entry point straightened instinctively, hands clasped behind his back. His uniform was crisp, his boots shining in the faint morning light. He squinted through the windshield at the woman in the driver's seat, confusion flickering in his eyes. "Ma'am, your clearance?" he called, his tone polite but firm. Sarah smiled faintly, keeping her posture relaxed. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Donovan. I'm expected at headquarters." She reached for her ID, handing it through the window with a calm, deliberate motion. The guard took it, examining the laminated card carefully. "I don't see your name on the list. You'll need to wait for verification." Sarah's eyebrows lifted slightly, though her expression remained composed. A flash of amusement crossed her mind. Here she was, about to assume command of the base, and yet the very first barrier she encountered wasn't bureaucracy or protocol. It was a young guard who didn't recognize her. She could have ordered him to let her through immediately, but she chose otherwise. It wasn't about ego. It was about observing. Leadership, she reminded herself, wasn't just about rank, it was about people. Cars began to line up behind her, engines rumbling softly as impatient drivers honked lightly. The young guard shifted his weight, clearly nervous under the gaze of the woman who radiated calm authority. "Ma'am, you need to remain behind the gate until we verify your orders," he said again, voice firmer this time, though tinged with uncertainty. Sarah kept her smile, one that didn't undermine her authority, but invited respect. "Of course. Take your time. I know you're following protocol. It's important to do things right." The guard hesitated, then nodded. His hands hovered over the radio receiver at his shoulder. "I'll call it in," he muttered. "Just wait here." As the guard spoke, Sarah glanced at the horizon, letting her eyes sweep over the base she was about to command. Barracks stood in neat rows, a few soldiers jogging along the pathways, their disciplined movements already shaping the day. Maintenance crews moved with quiet purpose, while the early hum of armored vehicles stirred in the distance. This was a world she had spent years preparing for, a world of rules, precision, and unspoken hierarchy. Yet this simple moment at the gate reminded her that even in a place built on order, surprises awaited at every corner. Her mind drifted for a moment, back to her first days in the army. She remembered the skepticism, the whispers from peers who doubted a young woman could lead a platoon, let alone a battalion. "You won't last a year in command," they had said. She had ignored them, proving herself through action rather than words, earning respect not with a title, but with unwavering competence. Those early lessons had shaped her patience and humility, and now they were proving just as essential in a far smaller, quieter challenge, the young guard who didn't yet know who she was. The radio crackled suddenly, breaking her reverie. The guard's voice, tense but professional, came through. "Headquarters, we have a visitor requesting entry. ID matches an officer, but she's not on today's roster." "Repeat that," a deeper voice responded. Sarah watched the young guard's eyes widen slightly as he spoke into the receiver again. The realization hadn't yet dawned on him, but she could sense the tension rising. His fingers fidgeted on the windowsill, and a bead of sweat appeared at his temple. Protocol had put him in a bind, and he didn't know the stakes. "Ma'am, please remain here," he said again, softer this time, almost apologetic. She nodded slowly. I understand, she replied. Her voice carried no sarcasm, only quiet authority. You're doing exactly what you should. That's what discipline looks like. The guard blinked, clearly taken aback by her calm tone. It wasn't what he expected. Most visitors would have demanded to be let through or grown impatient. But here was a woman, composed, respectful, observing him as if she were evaluating his performance. In a way, she was. While they waited, Sarah allowed herself a brief internal smile. It had been a long journey to get here. Countless deployments, late nights in command rooms, dusty fields in foreign lands. Each mission, each challenge, had tested her resolve, but none had been quite like this. This was the first test on her very first day at her new command. Patience, observation, humility, and trust in the system she had come to lead. Minutes passed. The traffic behind her grew slightly restless, horns beeping softly. The guard shifted nervously, consulting his fellow sentry. Do we just let her through? One whispered. Not until HQ confirms, the other replied, tone firm. Sarah leaned back slightly, eyes scanning the orderly chaos around her. She noticed the small details, the way the morning sun reflected off the polished boots of a patrolling soldier, the crispness of the uniforms, the disciplined spacing of the vehicles waiting behind the gate. Everything spoke of order, of respect, of rules, but it also spoke of people learning, adapting, and sometimes fumbling when faced with unexpected situations. The radio crackled again, this time with confirmation from the operations office. The young guard froze, glanced at the ID, then back at Sarah. His mouth opened and closed before he found words. Ma'am, we've been your name. Lieutenant Colonel Donovan? Sarah nodded calmly. Yes, that's me. For a moment, silence fell over the checkpoint. Cars idling behind her seemed suddenly inconsequential. The guards snapped to attention, expressions a mix of embarrassment and awe. Ma'am, permission to escort you in? The senior guard asked, voice trembling slightly. Sarah smiled, a warmth in her eyes that immediately eased their tension. At ease. You did exactly what you were trained to do. That's all I needed to see. As the gate slowly opened and she drove through, Sarah allowed herself a quiet satisfaction. Today, her leadership hadn't been proven through rank or orders, but through observation and respect. And in the small, unexpected tension of a morning at the gate, she had found the perfect introduction to the soldiers she would soon lead. The road ahead was long, filled with challenges and triumphs alike, but Sarah Donovan was ready. She had arrived not just at Fort Hamilton, but at the very threshold of her next mission as a leader, tested not by battlefields, but by patience, observation, and the quiet moments that defined true command. The morning sun climbed higher over Fort Hamilton, casting a golden glow on the checkpoint, where Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Donovan waited patiently. Behind her, the line of vehicles grew restless, horns honking in mild frustration. But Sarah remained calm, her gaze steady, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. She wasn't anxious, wasn't frustrated, she was observing. Leadership, she reminded herself, was as much about patience as it was about action. Today, the test was subtle but telling. Could these young gate guards handle pressure, protocol, and uncertainty? The younger of the two guards, a freshly assigned airman with neat brown hair and hesitant movements, approached again. Ma'am, your name isn't on the roster for today, he said, voice tight. You'll have to wait until headquarters verifies your identity. Sarah exhaled softly, her expression serene. I understand, she said. Her voice was firm but kind, carrying an undertone of quiet authority. I know you're following orders. That's exactly what I need to see here. The guard frowned, confusion flashing across his face. But You're... He stopped mid-sentence, unsure how to phrase the doubt that was already creeping into his mind. Sarah smiled faintly, leaning back slightly in her seat. She could feel the tension rising, both from the young guard and the line of impatient drivers behind her. But she didn't rush. She never did. Leadership was about control, not impulse, and this moment, trivial as it seemed, was a microcosm of everything she had learned in 2 decades of service. From the corner of her eye, she noticed the senior guard whispering into his radio, glancing nervously at his subordinate. "We need confirmation. HQ, yes. Confirm ID. Verify clearance." His voice was professional, but edged with uncertainty. Sarah could see it all. The slight tremble in his hands, the rigid posture, the careful attention to every protocol. She allowed herself a private, quiet chuckle. She had been in their position, once fresh out of training, cautious, diligent, unsure if every decision she made was right. And she remembered how small moments like this could define a day, or even a career. Finally, the radio crackled. "Fort Hamilton, this is operations. Repeat your situation." "Operations, this is Gate 1. We have a female officer requesting entry." "Ma'am," the senior guard replied, voice controlled but tense. "ID matches Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Donovan, but she's not on the roster for today." There was a pause on the other end, the kind that made even trained soldiers hold their breath. Then came the voice of authority, calm but firm. "Gate 1, confirm credentials. If it's Lieutenant Colonel Donovan, you are to grant immediate access." The younger guard froze, his eyes wide. He glanced at Sarah, then to his colleague, then back at the ID in his hands. "Ma'am, Lieutenant Colonel Donovan?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "That's me." For a long moment, neither guard moved. Then the senior guard snapped to attention, a flush of embarrassment spreading across his face. "Ma'am, we didn't." Sarah held up her hand. "At ease," she said softly. "You did exactly what you were trained to do. I appreciate your diligence. That's why this base functions the way it does. You followed protocol, and that is commendable." The young guard's face softened, relief washing over him as he processed her words. He straightened, saluting shakily. "Yes, ma'am." "Permission to escort you in?" Sarah nodded, returning a calm smile. "Go ahead." As the gate slowly swung open, she drove forward, noting every detail. The asphalt gleamed under the morning sun, the neatly trimmed hedges lining the entryway reflecting the meticulous care of the base staff. Soldiers moved about their duties, unaware that the very woman about to pass among them was the officer who would soon command them all. She allowed herself a moment to reflect. Leadership had many forms. Some relied on authority, others on intimidation, and still others on experience alone. She had learned long ago that true authority came from a combination of calm presence, earned respect, and the ability to observe before acting. Today, she had watched and measured. And in these 2 guards, she had seen what she needed: diligence, patience, and the willingness to act according to the rules even under pressure. The senior guard stepped aside, gesturing for her to proceed. "Follow me, ma'am. I'll take you to headquarters." As Sarah followed, she noticed the line of vehicles behind her drivers, murmuring quietly, some whispering her name. Rumors had a way of spreading quickly in a military base, and she suspected that by the time she reached headquarters, a few people would already be speculating about the mysterious woman at the gate. Her mind wandered briefly to the many times she had faced skepticism. She remembered the first time she was deployed to Afghanistan, a young officer tasked with coordinating logistics for a battalion in hostile territory. Fellow soldiers had doubted her, some openly, others subtly. "You don't have the experience for this," they had said. You'll see how it really is in the field." She had smiled then, quietly. Experience, she knew, was only one piece of the puzzle. Courage, patience, and the ability to earn trust mattered far more. And today, she was reminded of those lessons in an unexpected, mundane moment at a base gate. They drove through the main roads of the base, the SUV moving smoothly past barracks, training fields, and the neatly aligned vehicles of the motor pool. Soldiers glanced curiously at her as she passed, sensing perhaps that something unusual was afoot. Yet none could know for certain. In her plain civilian clothes and subtle demeanor, Sarah Donovan could have been any officer, any visitor, or even a civilian contractor. That was the beauty of the moment. It allowed her to enter, not by demand, but by observation, respect, and subtle authority. At the headquarters entrance, the escort guards paused. "Ma'am, here we are," the senior guard said, a note of awe in his voice. I can't believe it." Sarah looked at them, her gaze warm yet commanding. "Believe nothing," she said with a faint smile. "Respect is earned, not assumed. Today, you earned my respect by following protocol, by doing your duty calmly, and by trusting the process. That is how leaders and soldiers succeed together." The young guard straightened, pride replacing his earlier anxiety. He had been tested unexpectedly, and he had passed. "Yes, ma'am," he said, his voice steady now. Sarah stepped out of the SUV, taking in the crisp air of the morning. Headquarters loomed ahead, a symbol not just of authority, but of responsibility. The weight of command was a burden she had long carried, and now it would rest squarely on her shoulders here at Fort Hamilton. For the first time, she allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The test at the gate had been simple yet profound. It had reminded her why discipline, respect, and patience mattered more than titles or reputation. And in the quiet diligence of two young soldiers, she had seen the reflection of the army she would lead, a force capable, resilient, and ready for challenges far beyond the gates of a base. She squared her shoulders, adjusting the folds of her uniform in the back seat, and walked confidently toward the headquarters doors. Every step echoed with purpose. Today was the first step in a journey that would test her intellect, courage, and leadership in ways both familiar and unprecedented. And as she entered, she silently promised herself that she would lead not by fear, but by example, respect, and unwavering integrity. As Sarah Donovan stepped into headquarters, the morning light filtering through the tall windows illuminated the polished floors and crisp uniforms of the officers gathered there. But her mind, for a moment, drifted far away from Fort Hamilton. She was no longer at a gate with confused guards. She was back in Afghanistan, in the dusty haze of a remote forward operating base, where survival depended on every decision she made, every command she issued. She remembered the first time she had been deployed overseas. Fresh from officer candidate school, young and eager, she had arrived at a base that seemed both overwhelming and alive with chaos. The barracks were dusty, equipment strewn about, and the heat oppressive. Her superiors had given her a mission she had once thought would be impossible: coordinate the supply chain for a battalion deep in hostile territory, under constant threat of attack. "Lieutenant Donovan," her commander had said, eyes sharp with skepticism, "you'll need to ensure these units are supplied. Failure is not an option." His tone carried the unspoken doubt she had encountered her entire career. She nodded, lips tight, masking the rush of adrenaline and uncertainty surging through her. Doubt had always been the first challenge she faced, as a woman, as a young officer, as someone expected to command respect in a male-dominated environment. The first convoy she led was chaotic. Trucks overloaded with supplies crawled over rough, dust-choked roads, soldiers muttering complaints as the sun beat down mercilessly. Improvised checkpoints slowed their progress, and one vehicle broke down entirely in the middle of a dry riverbed. The soldiers looked to her, their young faces full of questioning eyes. "What now, Lieutenant?" one had asked. Sarah had taken a deep breath, squinting against the sun. She remembered the words she had whispered to herself then. Leadership isn't about proving yourself. It's about ensuring others succeed. She had crouched beside the broken truck, hands greasy and arms aching, coordinating repairs with mechanics, calming nervous soldiers, and redirecting the convoy. By dusk, the supplies had reached the intended units. The battalion had been fed, and the soldiers had survived the journey. That day, she had earned more than a commendation. She had earned the beginning of trust. And she had begun to understand the delicate balance required of a leader. Authority tempered with empathy, decisiveness balanced with patience. Her mind shifted to another memory, her first firefight. She had been tasked with securing a perimeter while reinforcements arrived. Explosions shook the earth, and the air was thick with smoke and fear. Soldiers looked to her for direction, and she had delivered orders clearly, calmly, even as her heart raced. Every movement, every command had to be precise, for mistakes could cost lives. That day, she had watched soldiers grow under pressure, watched them follow her not because of her rank, but because of her composure, her ability to navigate chaos with clarity. Back at the gate of Fort Hamilton, those lessons were now strikingly familiar. The young guards had hesitated, but they had followed protocol, just as her soldiers in Afghanistan had obeyed, despite fear and uncertainty. Leadership, she realized, was universal. It manifested in moments, large and small, whether in a desert under fire or a morning checkpoint at a military base. Her flashbacks continued, threading through her career like a tapestry of trials and triumphs. She remembered the grueling physical challenges, the endless hours of planning exercises, and the delicate negotiations with fellow officers who doubted her abilities. Every no she had faced, every whispered doubt, had been transformed into motivation. She had learned that respect could not be demanded, it had to be earned daily through action and integrity. And there had been personal sacrifices too. She remembered the nights spent alone in temporary barracks, writing reports by flashlight, the weight of responsibility pressing on her shoulders. Friends and family often asked if it was worth it. She had only smiled and returned to duty. Yes, it had been worth it. Each hardship had forged her into a leader capable of holding not only herself accountable, but also inspiring others to follow her example. Her thoughts wandered further to moments of quiet triumph. The day a platoon she commanded returned safely from a dangerous operation, their faces weary but proud, was etched into her memory. She had gone among them, shaking hands, listening to their stories, and offering encouragement. These were the victories that mattered, moments when leadership translated into lives saved, morale strengthened, and trust solidified. It wasn't always about courage under fire. Sometimes it was about listening. She remembered late-night discussions with junior officers, understanding their fears and ambitions, and helping them see their potential. Leadership was about balance, firmness, and kindness, strength and patience. And in those quiet, often unnoticed moments, she had honed the qualities that would define her command at Fort Hamilton. Sarah's reflections deepened as she recalled the challenges unique to being a female officer in a predominantly male environment. She had faced skepticism, subtle and overt. She had been tested in ways her male counterparts rarely were. Yet each challenge had strengthened her resolve. She had learned to navigate politics, win trust, and assert authority without arrogance. Each obstacle had been an opportunity to demonstrate competence, intelligence, and resilience. She thought of her mentors, the seasoned commanders who had guided her, offering advice, corrections, and support. They had taught her that true leadership wasn't about commanding attention, but about inspiring it. And she had taken those lessons to heart, refining her approach with each deployment, each mission, each interaction with her troops. Now, standing at the threshold of Fort Hamilton's headquarters, Sarah felt the culmination of these experiences. The young gate guards who had hesitated before her were a reflection of the challenges she had once faced, albeit in a smaller, less dangerous form. Yet the principles remained unchanged: patience, respect, observation, and decisive action. Leadership required the ability to assess, to understand, and to guide qualities she had honed in the fire of combat and the quiet discipline of training. As she took a deep breath, the echo of helicopter rotors in the distance reminded her that duty awaited. Fort Hamilton was her new battlefield, not one of war, but of responsibility, of morale, of organization, and trust. The soldiers here would look to her, just as those young soldiers in Afghanistan had looked to her. And she would not disappoint. She straightened her posture, folding away the memories for now, and focused on the task ahead. Headquarters doors loomed, promising both challenges and opportunities. This base, with its rules, routines, and people, would soon become a reflection of her leadership. And though she carried the scars and wisdom of her past deployments, she was ready to shape a future built on respect, competence, and unwavering integrity. For Sarah Donovan, the journey from dusty Afghan roads to the polished floors of Fort Hamilton was more than a story of rank or achievement. It was a story of resilience, perseverance, and quiet authority qualities that had prepared her for moments like this, when even a simple interaction at a gate could reveal the strength of a leader. As she pushed open the headquarters doors, she walked forward with confidence, carrying the lessons of the past into the promise of a new day. The challenges would come, the tests would arrive, but she was ready. And in her heart, she knew that every hesitation, every doubt she had faced along the way had prepared her for this very moment, her first day as Fort Hamilton's commander. A leader forged in fire, tested in dust, and tempered by experience. The radio crackled in the checkpoint office, snapping both guards from their haze of uncertainty. The young airman's hands trembled slightly as he held the microphone. Gate 1, this is Airman Johnson. We have a visitor requesting entry female officer. ID matches Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Donovan. Verification needed, over. There was a pause, longer than usual, as the voice from headquarters responded. Affirmative. Confirm clearance. If Lieutenant Colonel Donovan, grant immediate access. The words hung in the air. Johnson's eyes widened, his heart hammering in his chest. He glanced at the senior guard, Sergeant Hill, who looked equally stunned. Neither spoke immediately. The enormity of the realization pressed down like a physical weight. Ma'am, Johnson stammered, glancing at Sarah through the windshield. Lieutenant Colonel Donovan? That's you? Sarah nodded, her expression calm and composed, as if she hadn't just witnessed two guards freeze in astonishment. Yes, she said softly, her voice steady. That's me. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stretch. Johnson's mouth opened and closed, but no words emerged. Sergeant Hill's hand went to his forehead, a mixture of embarrassment and awe painted across his face. The young guard beside him seemed to shrink, realizing that the very woman they had almost denied entry was the commanding officer they had been expecting for weeks. Permission. To escort you in, ma'am? Johnson finally managed, voice shaky. His salute was sharp, but hesitant, reflecting both surprise and respect. Sarah returned the salute with the same calm authority she had demonstrated countless times in far more dangerous situations. Go ahead, she said simply. You did exactly what you were trained to do. That is what matters. Sergeant Hill cleared his throat, still struggling to process the moment. Ma'am, we didn't recognize you. I apologize, ma'am, he said, stammering. She smiled gently. No apology needed. You followed protocol. That's the first step of good leadership discipline and adherence to rules. I commend you for it. The two guards exchanged quick, incredulous glances. Their embarrassment faded slightly as pride began to replace it. They had been tested unknowingly, and they had passed. The woman in front of them wasn't just a visitor. She was a leader who understood respect, patience, and duty. As Sarah stepped out of the SUV, the crisp morning air brushed against her face. She noticed the subtle, almost unconscious gestures of the guards, the upright stance, the alert gaze, the subtle tension in their shoulders that only now began to release. She had observed their reactions closely, noting everything, just as she had in countless field operations where lives had depended on discipline and composure. "Follow me," Sergeant Hill said finally, his voice stronger, though still tinged with awe. "I'll take you to headquarters." As they walked, Sarah noticed the line of vehicles that had been waiting behind her. Some drivers craned their necks to see who the woman was. Whispers began to circulate. "Is that the new commander? And I heard she's been in multiple deployments." She allowed herself a faint smile. Her presence was already making waves, and it had only been a few minutes since her arrival. The escort through the base gave her an unexpected sense of déjà vu. She remembered leading convoys in hostile terrain, scanning every horizon, observing every detail, noting potential threats, and calculating outcomes. Though these were not threats in the conventional sense, they were a test of perception, composure, and respect. Even at Fort Hamilton, she recognized that leadership was as much about observation as it was about action. As they approached headquarters, a group of mid-level officers caught sight of her. Murmurs of confusion and curiosity spread across their faces. Sarah could see the mix of skepticism and intrigue. Some had been expecting a man in full uniform, with medals glinting in the morning sun. Instead, they were met by a woman walking calmly, exuding authority without ostentation. "Lieutenant Colonel Donovan, welcome to Fort Hamilton," Sergeant Hill said, his tone now formal, professional, and infused with a newfound respect. She nodded politely. "Thank you, Sergeant. I'm looking forward to meeting the team." Inside the headquarters, the reception area buzzed with activity. Officers were moving quickly, preparing for the morning briefing. As Sarah entered, all motion seemed to pause for a brief instant. Conversations halted, and heads turned. She moved with measured steps, eyes scanning the room, noting the posture, demeanor, and expressions of each officer. Leadership, she reminded herself, began with perception, understanding the environment, the people, and the challenges that lay ahead. Her gaze met that of a young lieutenant near the doorway. His eyes widened in astonishment, and he quickly straightened, snapping a sharp salute. "Lieutenant Colonel Donovan?" he asked, barely containing his surprise. "Yes," she said, her voice calm and commanding. "Reporting for duty." The room buzzed with whispers and hushed exclamations. Some officers exchanged glances, incredulous at the revelation. The commander they had been preparing for, anticipating, and perhaps even doubting, was standing before them, an accomplished woman whose reputation preceded her, but whose presence far exceeded expectations. Sarah's attention swept the room again. She noted the officers who were ready to question her authority, and the others whose respect had been immediate. She made a mental note to address both groups, knowing that true leadership required earning trust from skeptics while reinforcing confidence in supporters. Finally, she addressed the room, her voice steady and resonant. "Good morning. Today begins our journey together, not as individuals, but as a team. Leadership is earned, not demanded. Respect is not a formality. It is the product of consistency, integrity, and commitment. And it starts with simple actions, like the diligence you have all demonstrated at the gate this morning." The officers listened intently. The initial shock of her arrival slowly transforming into admiration and curiosity. Even the guards who had escorted her in felt the weight of her words, understanding for the first time the philosophy and mindset of the woman they had initially mistaken for a visitor. As she concluded, Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Leadership had many forms, some visible, some subtle, some immediate, others long-lasting. Today, at Fort Hamilton, the test had been subtle, but telling a moment at a gate that revealed more about discipline, respect, and composure than any ceremony or rank ever could. Sergeant Hill stepped forward, saluting again. "Ma'am, welcome aboard. You've already set an example today." Sarah returned the salute, a small, warm smile crossing her face. "Thank you. Let's make this base stronger, together." And with that, she walked further into headquarters, the hum of activity resuming around her, the whispers of astonishment slowly replaced by focus and purpose. She had arrived not with fanfare, but with the quiet authority of experience and the assurance that actions small and large define true leadership. The moment at the gate was over, but its lesson lingered. Appearances could deceive, authority was earned, and respect was measured in patience, composure, and the ability to guide others without demanding it. For Sarah Donovan, Fort Hamilton was no longer just a posting. It was a stage for leadership, a place where her skills, integrity, and experience would be tested, and where she would prove that the quiet strength of a true commander could inspire even the most skeptical soldiers. As she prepared for her first official briefing, Sarah reflected that every step she had taken from dusty convoys to the corridors of this base had led to this moment. The guards had learned a lesson in humility. The officers had learned a lesson in expectation. And she had reminded herself that true leadership is not about recognition, but about impact. And the story of her quiet arrival, the moment she was almost denied entry, would linger as an example for all who witnessed it. That respect is not assumed, it is earned. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Donovan stepped fully into the Fort Hamilton headquarters, the polished linoleum floors reflecting the morning sunlight. Officers and enlisted personnel froze mid-motion, their conversations tapering off to hushed whispers. Some expected a stern, older man, decorated with medals and brimming with authority. Instead, they saw a composed woman, walking with quiet confidence, her uniform folded neatly in the back of a modest SUV, her presence commanding attention without ostentation. She paused at the entrance, scanning the room carefully. Every movement, every posture, every subtle expression told her more about her new team than any report ever could. A lieutenant fidgeted with his pen. A sergeant straightened nervously, and several young airmen exchanged uncertain glances. All of them had prepared for the arrival of their new commander, yet the reality before them challenged their expectations. "Good morning," Sarah began, her voice calm but carrying the resonance of authority. She allowed herself a small, knowing smile as she observed their reactions. "I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Donovan, your new base commander, reporting for duty." For a heartbeat, silence filled the room. Then murmurs spread, disbelief mingling with curiosity. Eyes darted to one another. Officers whispered under their breath, "That's her? She's young, a woman, and calm." Her gaze swept the room again, noting those who seemed skeptical, those who were genuinely curious, and those quietly observing. Leadership was rarely about instant approval. It was about patience, observation, and timing. She had learned this lesson in the heat of battle, when every decision could cost lives, and she would employ it now. "Before we begin, I want to share a brief observation," she continued, her tone measured and deliberate. "This morning, I arrived at the gate. You may have heard about it already, or perhaps it has reached your ears through whispers. At the gate, I was asked to wait because my clearance wasn't immediately verified. The young guards were following protocol. They did exactly what they were trained to do. And for that, they earned my respect. Why? She paused, letting the room absorb her words. Because leadership is not about immediate recognition or assumed authority. It is earned through actions, through discipline, and through respect for the process. The guards at the gate did not know who I was, yet they acted with professionalism and composure. That is the foundation of this base and of this military. Respect is earned, not given. Trust is built, not demanded. A few officers shifted in their seats, clearly impressed by the framing of her lesson. Some nodded, realizing that this was more than an anecdote, was the philosophy of a commander who had led in far harsher conditions than a base gate could ever produce. I will lead this base, she said, her voice firm now, not with intimidation, nor with fear, but through example, integrity, and dedication. I will be present in every area of operation, from the motor pool to the training grounds, from the logistics offices to the living quarters. I will know the people I command, their strengths, their concerns, and their potential. And I expect the same from you: honesty, discipline, and a commitment to excellence. The room was quiet, but tension had shifted from skepticism to curiosity. Officers and enlisted personnel alike were recalibrating their expectations. Leadership, they realized, was not about theatrics or rank. It was about substance, vision, and example. Let me make this clear, Sarah continued, walking slowly between the rows of desks. Her movements were deliberate, composed, and commanding without being intimidating. I am here to serve with you, to guide you, and to ensure that this base operates at the highest level possible. Mistakes will happen. Challenges will arise, but how we respond to them together will define us. Every decision matters, and every action has consequence. She stopped in front of a group of young lieutenants, her gaze meeting each of theirs. I expect initiative, yes, but I also expect accountability. Your actions will reflect on the entire team. There will be no shortcuts, no negligence, and no excuses. Discipline, preparation, and respect will be our standard. A hand raised from the back. Lieutenant James, a recent transfer, hesitated before speaking. Ma'am, I've heard about your deployments, about how you manage supply lines under fire and coordinated complex operations. How will that translate to here, at Fort Hamilton, in a non-combat environment? Sarah allowed herself a brief smile. Good question. Leadership is not defined by the environment, Lieutenant. Whether in a combat zone or on a base, the principles remain the same. Understanding your team, anticipating challenges, making informed decisions, and maintaining composure under pressure. The environment may change, but the responsibility does not. The lives you impact directly or indirectly depend on your ability to lead effectively. Her words resonated throughout the room. Officers and enlisted alike began to see her not just as a newcomer, but as a leader whose credibility was earned through experience, not by rank alone. I will visit every division of this base in the coming days, she continued, pacing deliberately. I will meet with you in offices, training grounds, and motor pools. I will observe your processes, listen to your concerns, and work alongside you. Leadership is not a distant function. It is active, engaged, and present. And I expect you to do the same for each other. This is a team effort. No one operates in isolation, and no one is exempt from responsibility. A murmur of agreement spread across the room. Officers exchanged glances, some clearly impressed, others wary but attentive. They were beginning to understand that this commander, this woman who had quietly challenged their assumptions, was not here to be questioned lightly. She had seen challenges far greater than anything they could throw at her, and she carried the authority of experience, not ego. Sarah paused, allowing her words to sink in. Finally, she said, her voice softening slightly, I want you to know that I will not demand respect. I will earn it alongside you. Mistakes will be addressed, Yes, but learning and growth will be encouraged. Discipline without understanding is empty. Leadership without empathy is hollow. We will build a base that is respected not just for its operations, but for its people, and the way we treat one another. The room was silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling like a tangible presence. Then, one by one, officers began to nod, some murmuring quiet affirmations. The energy in the room shifted from curiosity to engagement, skepticism to cautious admiration. Sergeant Hill, who had escorted her in, stepped forward once more, saluting sharply. "Ma'am, you've already set an example this morning. We're ready to follow your lead." Sarah returned the salute, her smile calm and encouraging. "Thank you, Sergeant. Let's make this base stronger, together. The work ahead will be challenging, but it will also be rewarding. And remember, every action, no matter how small, contributes to the success of our mission." As she walked toward the front of the room to begin the first official briefing, she noticed the subtle change in posture among the officers and enlisted personnel. They were no longer simply waiting to be told what to do. They were observing, evaluating, and beginning to understand the example she had set. Leadership, she knew, was contagious. It could inspire, it could guide, and when executed correctly, it could transform an entire organization. The moment at the gate had been a test. Today was the beginning of her true command. And Sarah Donovan, with the wisdom of years, the composure forged in battle, and the quiet confidence of earned respect, was ready to lead Fort Hamilton into a new era of discipline, unity, and excellence. The first week of Sarah Donovan's command at Fort Hamilton was a whirlwind of introductions, inspections, and evaluations. From the polished floors of headquarters to the dusty training grounds, she moved with purpose, noting every detail. Every soldier she passed, every officer she addressed, was a potential ally or skeptic, and she treated both with equal respect. Leadership, she knew, required understanding the environment, the people, and the processes before attempting to change them. Her first stop was the motor pool, where trucks and armored vehicles lined up like a mechanical army, engines idling and exhaust smoke curling into the morning air. Mechanics and technicians worked in organized chaos, grease on their hands, sweat on their brows. She watched quietly, observing workflow, efficiency, and morale. One mechanic, Private Daniels, hesitated as she approached. Lieutenant Colonel Donovan?" he said, unsure if he should speak. "Yes?" Sarah asked, voice calm and encouraging. I just wanted to ask if you want us to speed up inspections or—" She shook her head gently. "Not speed up. Accuracy and thoroughness matter more than speed. I want these vehicles safe, reliable, and ready. Efficiency is important, yes, but mistakes and haste are costly. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Daniel said, nodding. Sarah smiled faintly and moved on, taking note of small inefficiencies and potential hazards. She didn't make abrupt changes yet. Observing, understanding, and gaining trust were her priorities. Leadership, she knew, was not about instant reform. It was about earning respect through action and example. Next, she visited the barracks, where rows of neatly made beds and disciplined soldiers awaited inspection. She noticed subtle lapses, boots not polished to standard, uniforms slightly wrinkled, but she did not reprimand harshly. Instead, she asked questions, engaged in brief conversations, and listened to the concerns of her troops. A young private, Maria Sanchez, approached nervously. "Ma'am, is there anything I should do differently?" Sarah crouched slightly to meet her eye level. "Maria, the uniform is important, but it's not just about appearance. It's about pride in your duty. How you carry yourself, how you treat others, and how you perform your tasks, that's what matters most. Attention to detail comes from discipline, not fear." Learn that, and the rest will follow." The private nodded, a small spark of confidence lighting her face. Sarah moved on, satisfied that the lesson was quietly absorbed. Leadership was not always loud. Sometimes it was subtle, nearly invisible, yet infinitely powerful. The challenges increased when a supply chain issue arose. An overseas deployment was scheduled in less than a week, and several essential pieces of equipment had not arrived on time. Panic would have been expected among less experienced leaders, but Sarah remained composed. She called an emergency meeting with logistics officers, walking into the war room like she had countless times before in hostile territories. "Show me the delays," she said, scanning the maps, manifests, and tracking reports. "Where are the bottlenecks?" They pointed to a mix of shipment errors and coordination failures between the base and its contractors. Sarah's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "We'll work through this systematically. Assign teams to each bottleneck. Communicate constantly. No assumptions. Double-check every order, every manifest. And stay in the field until the problem is resolved. I want progress updates every hour." Officers exchanged glances. Some hesitated. This was unprecedented. But her calm decisiveness reassured them. She wasn't barking orders. She was leading with precision, the same way she had in combat zones. Within hours, teams were mobilized, problems assessed, and work underway. By the next morning, critical equipment was already en route, thanks to her hands-on leadership. She spent long hours with the logistics team, reviewing manifests, coordinating priorities, and even performing tasks herself to set an example. Her hands were covered in grease and ink, her eyes tired, but she pressed on. The soldiers watched in awe. Here was a commander willing to share the burden, not just dictate from behind a desk. Over the next weeks, Sarah rotated through every division: training grounds, administrative offices, maintenance bays, and even mess halls. She knew that leadership extended beyond efficiency. It was about morale, trust, and respect. She listened to complaints, celebrated small victories, and held private conversations with officers unsure of their capabilities. Her approach was personal yet professional, firm but compassionate. Some officers, initially skeptical of her methods, began to change. They noticed her tireless work ethic, her detailed observations, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. "She's not just talking the talk," one sergeant remarked quietly to a colleague. "She's walking it." Even the guards who had first stopped her at the gate were transformed by her presence. They became more confident, their performance improving under her guidance. She had earned their respect, not through her rank, but through her patience, fairness, and unwavering commitment to the rules and to the people who followed them. A particular challenge arose when a senior officer voiced resistance to her hands-on approach. "Ma'am, we don't usually involve the commander in every minor operation," he said, his tone cautious but defiant. Sarah regarded him steadily. "And yet, ma'am, we are accountable for every aspect of this base. Leadership isn't about delegating all responsibility. It's about knowing the ground realities, understanding your people, and ensuring that the mission is accomplished without failure. I will be involved because I care about results, not because I doubt your capabilities. Work with me, not against me." Her firm yet respectful tone left no room for argument. The officer, though initially frustrated, gradually recognized the merit in her approach. Over time, resistance transformed into cooperation, skepticism into trust. By the end of her first month, Sarah had not only resolved logistical delays, but also strengthened morale, streamlined operations, and set a standard of accountability. Her leadership style, visible, engaged, and hands-on, was gradually transforming Fort Hamilton into a model of efficiency and respect. Soldiers began to emulate her discipline, officers began to mirror her thoroughness, and the base itself began to hum with a quiet but tangible energy. Yet Sarah knew the work was far from complete. Leadership was a continuous trial. Every day brought new challenges, new decisions, and new opportunities to earn trust. But she welcomed the trials. Each obstacle was a chance to demonstrate competence, integrity, and calm authority, the qualities that had defined her career from the dusty convoys of Afghanistan to the polished floors of Fort Hamilton. As she walked through the training grounds late one evening, observing soldiers practicing drills under the fading sun, she allowed herself a brief moment of satisfaction. The base was responding. Trust was building. Discipline was strengthening. And she knew, deep down, that her approach tested under fire, refined in experience, and executed with patience, was proving successful. Leadership, she reflected, was not just about issuing orders. It was about being present, observing carefully, intervening wisely, and earning the respect of every individual, from the newest private to the most senior officer. Fort Hamilton was no longer just a posting. It was a living testament to the power of quiet, steadfast authority. Sarah smiled faintly, watching soldiers execute maneuvers with precision, noting improvements in coordination and morale. The trials of command were never ending, but they were also the most rewarding moments of her career. She had transformed uncertainty into efficiency, skepticism into trust, and a group of individuals into a cohesive, disciplined team. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the base, Sarah Donovan felt the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing the first trials had been passed, and that the foundation of respect, trust, and excellence had been firmly laid. Weeks had passed since Sarah Donovan had first arrived at Fort Hamilton. The base, once a collection of units functioning independently with varying degrees of discipline, was beginning to hum with a sense of purpose and cohesion. Soldiers moved with precision, officers coordinated seamlessly, and morale was noticeably higher. Sarah walked through the base, her eyes scanning every detail, noting improvements and identifying areas still needing refinement. At the training grounds, a platoon ran drills under the watchful eyes of their instructors. Sarah approached quietly, observing. The soldiers moved with synchronized precision, their steps echoing across the open field. Their rifles were handled with care, drills executed flawlessly, and the air was thick with disciplined focus. A faint smile crossed her face. Progress, she thought, was visible not just in reports, but in action. Sergeant Hill, now fully confident in his role, approached her. "Ma'am, the teams are performing better than I expected. Even the new recruits are keeping pace. Your leadership, it's inspiring them to exceed expectations." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Good. Remember, Sergeant, leadership is about consistency. Inspiration alone is not enough. Discipline and accountability must be maintained. Keep guiding them and ensure they understand that excellence is not a suggestion, it's a standard." Meanwhile, officers who had initially been skeptical of her hands-on approach began to speak openly about her impact. Lieutenant James, the young officer who had questioned her philosophy in her first briefing, now approached her with a confident demeanor. "Ma'am, the coordination between divisions is stronger than it's ever been. We're actually anticipating needs before they arise. Your guidance, it's changed the way we operate." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you, Lieutenant. That's exactly the outcome I want. Anticipation, preparation, and attention to detail, these are what separate good units from exceptional ones." But transformation wasn't only about efficiency. Sarah had also addressed morale, recognizing the importance of pride, teamwork, and respect. She initiated regular town hall-style meetings where soldiers and officers could voice concerns, share ideas, and offer feedback. She spent time listening, asking questions, and making thoughtful decisions that reflected both strategic priorities and individual well-being. Private Sanchez, who had approached her nervously in the barracks weeks earlier, now spoke with confidence in one such meeting. "Ma'am, I think morale has improved a lot. Soldiers feel like their concerns are actually heard, and that motivates us to perform better." Sarah nodded, satisfaction softening the firmness in her expression. "Good. Always remember, respect and trust are earned, not assumed. And it's the responsibility of every leader here to foster that environment every day." The culmination of her efforts came during a joint inspection with visiting officers from higher command. Normally, such inspections caused tension and anxiety, but at Fort Hamilton, the soldiers executed with calm confidence, demonstrating discipline and cohesion at every step. Vehicles were in perfect order, logistics reports were flawless, and training exercises proceeded without error. The visiting commander, a decorated colonel with decades of experience, observed quietly before speaking. "Lieutenant Colonel Donovan," he said, voice commanding yet appreciative, "this base is functioning at an exceptional level. Your leadership has transformed operations, morale, and discipline. The troops are motivated, organized, and prepared for any challenge. I've seen few commanders achieve this level of cohesion in such a short time." Sarah accepted the praise with humility, but inside, a quiet pride warmed her chest. She knew this recognition wasn't just for her, it was a testament to the soldiers, officers, and support staff who had risen to the challenge, guided by clear expectations and example. As the inspection concluded, she gathered her officers and addressed them once more. "What you've achieved here is not because of my presence alone. It's because you chose to respond to challenges with diligence, to embrace discipline, and to trust the process. Leadership is a partnership. We succeed together, or we fail together. Today, you've proven we can succeed." Whispers of agreement and nods of acknowledgement spread across the room. The officers now fully understood the philosophy Sarah had introduced. Authority earned through respect, influence demonstrated through action, and cohesion built through consistency. Even the young guards who had first stopped her at the gate played a part in this transformation. They had become more confident, more decisive, and better able to handle unexpected situations. Sarah's influence had extended beyond strategy and logistics. It had reshaped the culture of Fort Hamilton from the ground up. Yet Sarah knew that true leadership demanded vigilance. Challenges were always ahead. Equipment would fail, schedules would shift, and morale could falter if neglected. But she felt confident in the foundation she had laid. Her presence was no longer a surprise. It was a steadying influence, a benchmark for excellence, and a source of inspiration. One afternoon, as she walked through the motor pool, she observed a group of mechanics laughing quietly, sharing a lighter moment after a long day. It reminded her that leadership was not solely about discipline or efficiency. It was also about humanity, connection, and trust. Soldiers performed best when they felt respected, understood, and valued. Her methods had achieved both operational excellence and human engagement. Sergeant Hill approached her, a rare smile breaking across his face. "Ma'am, the base feels different now, confident, strong. The soldiers are motivated. Even the senior officers are adjusting their approach to match your standard. Fort Hamilton, it's transformed." Sarah looked around, taking in the sight of a base alive with purpose and efficiency. "Yes, Sergeant. But remember, transformation is continuous. Complacency is the enemy of excellence. We must remain vigilant, disciplined, and committed. The work doesn't end here." That evening, Sarah reflected on her journey from the dusty roads of Afghanistan to the polished floors of Fort Hamilton, from skepticism and doubt to recognition and trust. She thought about the moment at the gate, the young guards who had hesitated, and how every small interaction could reveal larger truths about character, discipline, and leadership. In her quiet office, she allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction. The base was functioning better than it had in years. Soldiers were confident, officers were aligned, and morale was high. The transformation she had envisioned was taking shape, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it through example, consistency, and dedication. And yet, she knew the story of leadership was never complete. Fort Hamilton would face new challenges, deployments, and tests of character. But she was ready. Every decision she made, every lesson she imparted, and every example she set would continue to shape this base, ensuring that it could meet any challenge with confidence, cohesion, and excellence. Sarah Donovan had not only claimed her role as commander, she had redefined it. Her leadership had been tested, proven, and fully recognized. The officers, soldiers, and staff now understood her philosophy: respect earned through action, discipline enforced through example, and success achieved through teamwork. Fort Hamilton was no longer simply a base, it was a reflection of her vision, her experience, and her unwavering commitment to leadership. As the sun set over the base, casting golden light across the orderly grounds, Sarah felt a quiet sense of triumph. Transformation was not instantaneous. It was painstaking, deliberate, and earned through effort. But Fort Hamilton had changed. Soldiers moved with purpose, officers acted with confidence, and a culture of trust and excellence had taken root. And at the center of it all was a commander who had quietly, patiently, and firmly reshaped everything she touched. A sudden alert broke the morning calm at Fort Hamilton. The base's communication center buzzed with urgency, an unexpected security breach in one of the training zones. Alarms blared softly as officers scrambled and soldiers rushed to their designated positions. Sarah Donovan, already in the midst of her daily rounds, was immediately aware of the situation. Her mind, honed through years of field operations, instantly processed the facts. Potential threat, rapid response needed, coordination essential. She reached the command center and surveyed the chaos. Screens displayed security footage. A small group of intruders had breached the perimeter fence near the southern training ground. No weapons were visible yet, but the intruders were moving fast, and the security team was on high alert. "Status report," Sarah demanded, her tone calm yet commanding. Lieutenant James, now seasoned under her leadership, responded quickly. "Ma'am, intruders are moving toward the training zone. Security teams are in position, but they're unarmed. We need orders." Sarah's eyes scanned the maps and surveillance feeds, calculating the best approach. "Deploy the security teams in a containment perimeter. Do not engage unless necessary. I want non-lethal measures first: barriers, cordons, and blocking exits. Our priority is to avoid escalation while maintaining control." The officers and soldiers followed her instructions precisely, a testament to the trust and cohesion she had cultivated over weeks of leadership. Every command was executed with discipline, every move coordinated flawlessly. Sarah's calm authority reassured everyone, preventing panic from taking hold. As the teams contained the intruders, Sarah ordered a controlled approach. She approached the perimeter herself, flanked by a small team of senior officers. Her presence was deliberate, measured, and authoritative, a visual representation of command that inspired confidence. Through the comms, she guided her teams. Maintain calm. Communicate clearly. Observe. Document. We will handle this professionally and decisively. The intruders, now realizing they were surrounded, hesitated. Sarah's voice, carried over a loudspeaker, was firm yet non-threatening. You are inside a restricted area. Surrender peacefully and avoid escalation. Follow instructions, and no one will be harmed. One by one, the intruders complied, raising their hands as security teams escorted them safely back to a secure holding area. The operation concluded without injury or chaos, a flawless execution of strategy, discipline, and leadership. Inside the command center, Officers exhaled collectively, adrenaline giving way to relief. Lieutenant James approached, shaking his head in amazement. "Ma'am, we executed that perfectly. Not a single error. Your approach, your guidance, kept everyone calm and focused." Sarah allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. "This is what I've trained for, and what you've prepared for. The strength of this base isn't in a single person, it's in every one of you, working together, trusting each other, and following the standard. Today proved that we are ready for any challenge." The aftermath of the incident revealed more than tactical success. Soldiers spoke of how Sarah's calm presence had reassured them, her instructions clear and decisive. Officers praised her ability to think critically under pressure, her fairness in decision-making, and her ability to maintain composure when the stakes were high. Her philosophy leadership earned through respect, discipline, and example was validated in a real-world test. Later that evening, the entire base gathered for a briefing and reflection session. Sarah addressed everyone, her presence commanding but approachable. "Today, you demonstrated what this base can achieve when we work together, follow protocol, and trust one another. This was not my success alone, it was yours. Every decision, every action, and every moment of composure contributed to the outcome. You have proven that Fort Hamilton is prepared, disciplined, and cohesive." Applause filled the room, but Sarah's gaze moved beyond the surface. She observed each officer and soldier, noting subtle expressions of pride, relief, and understanding. This was the true reward, not recognition, not accolades, but the knowledge that her guidance had created a capable, confident, and unified team. The base's higher command took notice as well. A formal commendation was issued, praising Lieutenant Colonel Donovan for her exceptional leadership, strategic foresight, and ability to cultivate discipline and trust throughout the base. The story of the security breach and its peaceful resolution under her command spread across units, reinforcing her reputation as a leader who could inspire, manage, and protect with equal skill. But Sarah knew that recognition, while gratifying, was secondary to the true purpose of her role. Leadership, she reflected, was about creating systems, fostering confidence, and preparing people to succeed independently. Today's success wasn't hers alone. It was the product of weeks of careful guidance, trust building, and hands-on mentorship. As the base returned to normal operations, Sarah took a solitary walk along the perimeter she had once patrolled only in memory. The fence now stood secure, the training grounds orderly, and the soldiers moving with confidence and purpose. She reflected on the journey from being nearly turned away at the gate to proving herself through careful observation, strategic planning, and consistent leadership, to commanding respect and achieving tangible results. Her thoughts drifted to the young guards who had first stopped her. They had learned a critical lesson that day at the gate, just as the soldiers had learned a lesson during today's security incident. Leadership was earned through action, not assumed by rank. Respect was cultivated through integrity, consistency, and fairness. And trust was built when leaders demonstrated competence and care simultaneously. Sarah knew that Fort Hamilton was now more than a base. It was a living embodiment of these principles. Every officer and soldier had internalized the lessons, and the culture of excellence had taken root. Challenges would arise in the future, as they always would, but the foundation she had laid ensured that the base would face them with confidence, cohesion, and discipline. The final moments of her first significant test as commander were quiet but profound. Sitting in her office, she reviewed reports from the day, noting both successes and minor areas for improvement. Even after the flawless resolution of the incident, she identified small procedural adjustments, demonstrating that leadership was never complacent. It was continuous, reflective, and forward-thinking. A soft knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. Sergeant Hill entered, saluting. "Ma'am, the base is secure. Soldiers are settled. Officers are reporting their assessments. They're inspired, ma'am. Your leadership has made a lasting impression. Sarah returned the salute, a faint smile crossing her face. Thank you, Sergeant. That impression is only lasting if it is maintained. Today proved our capability. Tomorrow, we continue to build upon it. As the sun set over Fort Hamilton, casting long shadows across the orderly grounds, a sense of accomplishment filled the base. The soldiers and officers had witnessed a commander who led not with fear, but with authority earned through competence and example. They had seen the quiet strength of a woman who could inspire confidence, manage crises, and cultivate trust, all without a single display of ego. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Donovan's journey had come full circle. From being halted at a gate, underestimated, and met with doubt, she had proven herself through observation, hands-on guidance, and strategic foresight. She had earned respect, not just from guards and officers, but from every soldier whose life and duty intersected with hers. Fort Hamilton was stronger, more cohesive, and prepared for any challenge because of her leadership. And in that moment, Sarah Donovan understood something fundamental. Leadership was not about recognition or rank. It was about the lives impacted, the systems strengthened, and the trust earned. Her legacy at Fort Hamilton was not written in commendations alone, but in the transformation of the base, the confidence of its soldiers, and the unity of its officers. As she gazed over the horizon, the base quiet beneath the evening sky, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The gate where her arrival had once been questioned, the skepticism she had faced, the trials she had endured, all of it had led to this. A base functioning at peak performance, a team inspired and prepared, and a commander whose leadership had been tested, proven, and immortalized in the respect and trust of those she led. Sarah Donovan had arrived at Fort Hamilton as an unknown, a figure almost denied entry. She left it as a living testament to leadership, integrity, and the enduring power of respect earned through action. And as the stars began to shine above the base, the legacy she had created, quiet, steadfast, and unshakable, stood as a reminder that true leadership transcends expectations, defies stereotypes, and shapes every life it touches.